Hello everybody and welcome back to Retro Gamer Diaries, and today we're looking at another platform game, but this time based on the antics of the worldly hero of the East, Bruce Lee. Yes, today we're going back to look at the 1984 Bruce Lee platform game, which was written by John J. Fortier for the Atari 8-bit computers and published in 1984 by Datasoft. And the graphics were done by Kelly Day and the music was done by John A. Fitzpatrick. And also in this video we're going to look at the Commodore 64 and the Apple II versions, which were released the same year, and the MS-DOS, which was released in 1987. The game was also converted to the ZX Spectrum, the BBC Micro and the Amstrad CPC, and this was published by US Gold. And it was the first US Gold release featuring a famous individual such as Bruce Lee. And then finally, we're going to look at the MSX version and the PC-8801. And these games were published in 1985 by Comtic. Exciting stuff. Anyway, let's start by looking at the Atari 8-bit version, and then we'll look at the Commodore 64 version, which was also made simultaneously with the Atari version. So, put on your black belts and let's go. Right, so here's the Atari 8-bit version. So, what's the story of this game? Well, Bruce has returned to the land of his forefathers to destroy a wicked wizard. Should he succeed, he will be rewarded with treasure beyond the capacity of his knapsack, which seems a bit of a shame. The plot involves our legendary martial artist advancing from chamber to chamber in a wizard's tower, seeking to claim infinite wealth and the secret of immortality. There are 20 chambers, each represented by a single screen with platforms and ladders. And to progress, our player must collect a number of lanterns suspended from various points in the chamber. And points are awarded when you're collecting these lanterns and laying out any of the opponents. 2,000 points are to be had simply for entering a new room. With every 30,000 points, a new life is given free. And the total points scored for each player are shown at the top of the screen, together with the current high score and the number of falls remaining before the game is over. Now, Bruce's first task will be to find his way into the underground chamber by discovering the secret entrance. This can be found in the floor of the middle entrance hall, but it will not open until Bruce has collected all of the lanterns from all three rooms, and that's just to get into the underworld where the real work starts. As Bruce makes his way across the other screens, he will face many bizarre dangers, which include electric charges that shoot across the gaps between platforms, or the awesome exploding bushes that appear from nowhere. Most chambers are guarded by two mobile enemies, the ninja, who attacks with a broken stick, and the green Yamo, a large unarmed warrior visually styled as a sumo wrestler, but attacking with punches and crushing kicks. Now those two characters devote themselves to Bruce's downfall. No matter where he is in the game, he will always be pursued by these two. For Bruce to be successful, the player must guide him through the fights as well as the maze. By given the appropriate commands, Bruce can be made to duck, thump or kick his flying kick, which is his most devastating. The other characters have the same ability except they're unable to duck, so hard luck Yamo. Now, Bruce will survive 3 blows before he loses a life, and the opponents, well, they will lose consciousness after 2 or 3 blows, which gives Bruce a brief amount of time to gather the lanterns and be on his way to find the button and kill that stupid wizard. And upon completing the game, it loops again. And from the second loop on, the ninja and Yamo are replaced as soon as they are killed, and the safe spots in the room with multiple electrified combs are removed. I suppose this mission completion game offers a fresh and intriguing blend of play elements. Now, I have to say, I did enjoy playing the Atari 8-bit version of Bruce Lee. I'm not saying it's perfect, but I did enjoy playing it. And although Kelly Day's graphics are good, even excellent in spots, there is a pretty obvious trade-off of visual brilliance for the dazzling play action. Bruce Lee is a good looking game with nice animation of the principal characters, but the real attraction is the varied playfield environments which designer Ron Fortier has created. And by collecting the right combination of lanterns, Bruce opens gates which allow him to advance from room to room on the way to the final showdown with that wizard. And every phase is completely different, which keeps the programme stimulating through untold replays. Now Bruce Lee won't be mastered overnight because playing well requires learning how to combine a wide assortment of moves and strategies. By learning when to leap for safety and when to duke it out with Yamo and his shadowy pal gives the disc an aura of excitement that's tough to beat. This is a truly unique programme. It takes gamers on a wild and dangerous trip into non-stop heroics. Now, with regards to the reception of this game, well, the game was in the top 10 of the UK software charts by May 1985 and topped the Atari chart by July 1985. And then by the following month, it was number 8 on the All Formats chart and number 1 on the Atari chart. And with regards to what the magazine thought, well, the Computer Gaming World stated that the Atari version delivers all the foot kicking, kick jabbing, quick ducking, action-packed adventure you expect from a good grade B martial arts movie. InfoWorld's Essential Guide to Atari Computers also said that the game's a good Atari 8-bit arcade game. Okay, so let's have a look at Bruce Lee on the Commodore 64. Now, the Commodore 64 version was developed simultaneously with the Atari version, so the gameplay doesn't differ that much from the essentials. The Commodore 64 version is very similar to the Atari in the audio, visual and gameplay. I suppose the only thing I would say is that the Atari version's a bit too slow for my taste, while the Commodore 64 plays a lot faster than the Atari one, which is better suited to my style of playing. Everything here is in perfect balance. The running is a bit twitchy in both of the originals because the surfaces aren't all exactly marble, so it feels sort of natural in a weird way. The underground obstacle movements are timed slightly different from the Atari version, but that's pretty much all of the noticeable differences that I can see here. Both the Atari and the Commodore 64 have very similar graphics, except slightly different colour palette, and the different system font, both of which is entirely a matter of preference. I suppose I kind of like the Atari system font a bit more, but everything else is all the same to me. And the ending screen looks more pleasing to the eye on the Commodore 64 though. And with regards to the sound, well, the Commodore 64 with its SID chip does exactly what it's expected to do, create a playing environment that drags you in time after time. While not the only one of the bunch that achieves this, it certainly ups the ante with this ridiculous amount of melodic sound effects, the best rendition of the Bruce Lee theme song also, and even a medley of national anthems or whatever on the tape loader version. And although there is a great title screen soundtrack, it is important to say that there's no music during the game itself. However, there is fun sound effects throughout the game. So overall, this is one of my all-time favourite games for the Commodore 64. Excellent gameplay. This game can certainly be described as addicting. The mix of strategy and fighting off enemies is about perfect, making it fun on different levels. If you've never played it, don't hesitate, you will not be disappointed with this game. Predictably, the Apple II conversion of Bruce Lee isn't that great. It first came out in 1984 and was programmed by Rick Mirsky. I suppose the main issue I have with it are the bugs that warp you to places on the screen that instantly kill you, and also occasions where you're on an elevator and can't get off because you're being kicked and punched to death by the two opponents who are stood on solid ground. The game is also much slower than the Atari, Commodore 64, the Amstrad and the Spectrum versions. And boy, those graphics, they really do start getting weird. I mean, the Apple version has a purple sky, green mountains and blue walls in the first area. I mean, Christ, I couldn't bother to play further than the second underground room. All the characters are black and white, or in the case of the ninja, just black. And the character animation feels a bit jerky. The font also looks weird, but I suppose that's a given. But blimey, the colours were such a pain for the eyes. I couldn't look at it more than a couple of minutes, to be honest with you. Sound-wise, the Apple II version is mostly annoying and produces some ear-piercing pitches that will make you want to murder your closest neighbour's cat. Which is a bit of a pity because the Bruce Lee on the Apple II is not a bad overall game. Yes, the graphics aren't as colourful as the other versions, but this conversion is playable, is at least very authentic to the original. Yes, the Apple II Bruce Lee isn't the worst version of Bruce Lee out there, but that's hardly a good reason to play it. I suppose die-hard Apple II fans will love it, but everyone else will probably be lukewarm about it and prefer playing the other versions. Right, so now we're on to the MS-DOS version, which was released in 1987 by Datasoft, 3 years after the Atari and Commodore 64 version. Now, the MS-DOS version, it's kind of close to the C64 in playability, but somehow feels unnatural playing it on the old analog PC joystick. The option is to play it on a keyboard, which is not bad at all, but might need getting a bit accustomed to. Certainly the MS-DOS version has the horrible 4-coloured CGA graphics, you know, cyan, magenta, white and black. But other than the colours, the MS-DOS version is perfectly fine and gets as close to the Atari and Commodore 64 versions in every other aspect. And also with regards to the sound, well, the MS-DOS version is surprisingly good and is probably quite close to the 64 version. Even with a dodgy PC beeper, you will hear a whole bunch of sounds that don't exactly try to imitate the Commodore 64 sounds, but there's definitely a unique kind of charm and character in this version. I mean, even the theme song is very close to the original, so for me, thumbs up. Right, okay, so here we are with the ZX Spectrum version by US Gold, which was released in 1985. Now, I'm going to stick my neck out here by saying Bruce Lee is one of the best action-packed animated games on the ZX Spectrum. Sure, it does have its flaws, but it's a good game. The graphics are certainly detailed enough, lively and okay to look at. But I suppose, while some of the structures and ornaments look more interesting and colourful, it's not really an improvement in any way when every background is coloured black and all the characters are white. Of course, this minimises the chance of colour clash, but if you have a character called Green Yamo, I think it should be green, don't you think? Well, nitpicking aside, it's not half bad when you play it. Everything's recognisable as to what they're supposed to represent, and all the characters do their stuff clearly enough as to what they're supposed to do. But I would say it's still way too far from the original though. And with regards to the playability, well, the Spectrum version plays pretty much as fast as the Commodore 64 version, but since it's not made by the original team, it differs a bit more in places than just in the graphics. First off, the game starts from a different spot, although in the same screen. Not too much, but it spawns more useless movement. Then, secondly, Bruce doesn't latch onto the weird elevator carpets, or whatever they're called, as soon as he touches them, and I haven't really gotten the hang of this thing yet. Third, Bruce falls a bit faster, which is a sort of nice. Fourth, and probably the most significant difference, is that the Green Yamo AI can climb ladders, whereas he couldn't do such action in the original versions. I really don't know if it makes it any better, it just adds its own flavour here. There are some small differences in the environment and obstacles in some screens, but nothing to make much of a difference in gameplay. Just something to make you notice, it's not exactly the same game, but it is close enough. Now, the way that Bruce punches, kicks and ducks is exceptionally good and terrific fun, simply to knock the stuffing out of your opponent. I love the way that you actually make physical contact with your enemy by punching in the nose or kicking in the ribs instead of just zapping with a photon laser phaser. The game gets a certain feel to it, it really does. And then another nice touch is the way the two opponents get into a fight if they get into each other's ways. I really enjoyed playing Bruce Lee, and although it was easy to complete, it was a game that I came back to quite often on my Specky. And I'm not too sure if you noticed, but one of the strange things about this game is that when you leap, he looks like he's a trained ballet dancer. And just like the other games, as the game progresses, it gets considerably more difficult. I must say that I found this specky game terrific fun. US Gold have really got the ingredients right this time. Well done. And with regards to the sound, well, the Spectrum version also has the theme song somewhat intact, but it does sound more garbled. It's almost unrecognisable. The sound effects are mainly just running sounds, random bips when collecting the hanging glowing items you're supposed to collect, and then the death sounds. Fighting sounds are completely ignored here. Kinda typical for a lot of ZX Spectrum games, I suppose. You know, it's all bleeps and farts. However, despite these minor flaws in the specky hardware, Bruce Lee is remembered as a classic ZX Spectrum game, praised for its innovative gameplay mechanics and its homage to the martial arts icon. It certainly remains popular among retro gaming enthusiasts for its challenging platforming action and nostalgic appeal. And finally, the ZX Spectrum version of Bruce Lee received enthusiastic reviews. Crash Magazine awards it 91%, highlighting zesty graphics, enjoyable fighting action, and addictivity. Sinclair User also found the game enjoyable, awarding 4 out of 5 stars, but felt that sound was underused and a larger variety of tasks could have been included. Your Spectrum were more critical, pointing out that it only takes a few games to complete all 20 chambers. I suppose that's true. And Home Computing Weekly praised the graphics and movement. In the 1990 retrospective, Your Sinclair found that Bruce Lee was still too easy to complete, and the graphics had not aged well. In addition, it was felt that the fighting moves available to the player lacked impact and were too limited for a beat-em-up. However, it was described as a historically important game, being the first to combine the platform, collection and beat-em-up. OK, the Amstrad CPC version of Data Sauce Bruce Lee was developed by Time Data Limited. And the Amstrad version at first looks like a mashup between the original and the Spectrum conversion. It certainly has elements from both. The graphics are as close to the original as you could want, but the gameplay is a bit of a mixed bag. Your character moves more similarly to the Spectrum version than the original, but the green YAML feels more slower than anywhere else. At some points the terrain seems to be a bit messed up, and you're required to do more jumping in order to move anywhere. I suppose the fighting in both Spectrum and the Amstrad versions feels a bit more stiff and quicker to execute than in the original. This makes the fighting a bit harder because you have to get close to your enemies in order to kill them. It's not very player friendly, especially in the later playthroughs when your enemies get more energetic. And with regards to the graphics, well, I suppose they're a bit chunky, but bright and smooth moving as well. And also, the characters are a bit small, but then again, the screens are somewhat big. The Amstrad version looks close enough to the originals, apart from a few strange choices in colours, but instead of using the system font for the score bar, they've decided to make their own font, which looks a bit unfitting for the game. Perhaps some may like it better, but I feel it somehow gives the action screen less presence somehow. I don't know why, but that's just my opinion. With regards to the sound, there's not much to talk about here, apart from your basic hit and kick sounds. The music becomes rather annoying after around 30 seconds. It makes you want to turn off the sound in the long run. But, in saying all that, Bruce Lee on the Amstrad CPC is still a fun game to play. There are some difficult places that are hard to beat, but that just makes the game more rewarding when you finally beat it. It might be a bit short, experienced gamers will finish the game fairly quickly. Amstrad users who played this back in 1986 when it first came out seem to have a lot of love for it, which is to be expected because Bruce Lee is a fun 1 or 2 player game and does have memorable moments. Alright, Christ, here we go. Bruce Lee on the BBC Micro is, well, let's just say that it's different to the classic Atari 8-bit or Commodore 64 originals. Not hugely different in terms of gameplay, more different in terms of how it looks and in the detail. The game was published by US Gold and Micropower in 1986. Okay, let's be honest. Bruce Lee on the BBC looks pretty bad. The animated figures are flickery and badly drawn. And the backgrounds are a barely adequate depiction of those seen in the original. The Green Yamo, the hilarious sumo opponent from the original, looks more like an alien in this version. And Christ, where's the ninja? I mean, the ninja opponent is missing entirely in this game. I mean, look at Bruce. Christ, he's all sunburnt with his ridiculous blonde hair, bright pink skin and red trousers, and his animation is subpar at best. Gameplay wise, BBC Bruce Lee is arguably too fast in terms of movement, and lining up Bruce to climb up ladders is frustratingly tricky. Sure, the controls are responsive, which helps, but fighting the Green Yamo requires luck and fast reflexes. If you get your kick timing wrong, you just get pummeled into a corner and quickly lose a life. Bloody frustrating. The structure of the game is basically the same as the original, jumping to collect lanterns to open doors to progress, but many of the details in the game sort of ruin it. Like, for example, the triggered explosions in this are not actually triggered by walking on switches on the ground, they just keep exploding on a timed cycle, which makes some screens almost impossible to complete without losing lives. Also, some of the hazard placement is not right or fair. The gameplay, as a result, is an exercise in frustration and a model of poor design and programming. Another detail that bugged me about this game is the fact that there are two separate keys for down and duck, which is not right, and it makes controlling Bruce on some screens a real pain. It's like the programmer couldn't be bothered to make pressing down to do both actions, depending on what Bruce was standing on. Plus, and to top it all, there are some screens missing, some screens that are completely different to the original, and some screens that are out of sequence. And it doesn't have the two-player mode of the original. Gosh, where's the two-player mode? That's part of the beauty of this game, isn't it? Flippin' heck, Bruce Lee on the BBC Micro is just a mess. Overall, I'd have to conclude that the programmer who made this conversion didn't actually care about making the game authentic or fair, and just did what the hell he bloody well liked. And I'm also guessing that the publisher didn't give him the time he needed to make it right. And the result is a pretty poor game in my opinion. Bruce Lee on the BBC Micro isn't very good at all. In fact, it's pathetic. It's absolutely pish poor. It's not a patch on the Atari or the Commodore 64 versions, and almost certainly isn't worth your time or effort. Again, I would prefer to murder the neighbour's cat. Right, the MSX conversion was coded by Mike Livesey and published by Comtique in 1985. Bruce Lee plays like the original and looks like it too, albeit a little bit squashed in terms of screen size ratio, and the sprites are a little flickery too, which is a bit unfortunate. The player movement is not quite as fast as on the Commodore 64, nor quite as slow as on the Atari and Amstrad. However, the MSX version has some quirky characteristics to the movement that put me a bit off. Bruce's jump starts off as slow as his running speed, but in mid-air goes noticeably faster than anywhere else. At least he doesn't keep on twitching as much according to the terrain, if it even bothered you. The enemy's recovery time from attacking is non-existent on the first difficulty level compared to the other versions. And also, the underground sections have their moving obstacles timed very differently, so it's definitely a bit harder as a default. The MSX graphics are also a bit off, mostly due to the screen size, but the colours are just plain weird. The background, for instance, is different in every area I could get myself to play into. The Palace Grounds background is green, the first underground section is cyan, strangely brighter than above, and below, well, that is light grey, which is actually a bit better than the original orange. Also, depending on the model of MSX you're using, you're going to experience a varying amount of character sprite flickering. But the character colours are strangely enough untouched from the original. The game can be played 1 or 2 player just like the original, with the second player controlling the baddies and player 1 controlling Bruce himself. Overall, not a bad conversion, and Bruce Lee on the MSX still has reasonable amount of entertainment value even today, especially the 2 player. I like that. Alright, so here's the NEC PC-88 version of Bruce Lee, which was published by Comtique. Now, playability wise, the PC-88 version isn't too far from the originals. Most of the character movement is close enough to the original, although the ninja seems to be replaced with a slower substitute. The graphics do their own part in making the game less playable as well, with all the flickering and the colours in use, because you really have to have a high stamina eyesight to be able to play this one for more than 5 minutes in one sitting. We'll come back to the colours in a moment. However, the flickering has some effect on the gameplay. It makes fighting the green Yamo a bit difficult, since your characters are flickering like hell while on the move, and the collision detection in fights is dependent on the sprites connecting at certain points. Yeah, that insane amount of flickering just makes it a bit more random. In the very essentials, it looks close enough to the original, but the colour scheme was probably made by someone just pure evil. You can certainly deal with the first area, even though the mountains in the background are horribly orange and red. I suppose at least Bruce Lee is still yellow, but his torso looks floating against the mountains. He jumps and runs admirably fast, very much like he should. The ninja is also black, which is good, but the green Yamo is somehow made black and white, which makes him look like an undesirable mass of dark blobby matter. Then there's the flickering, which I already mentioned earlier. This makes the PC-88 version almost as bad as the BBC version. When you get to the first underground section, the game suddenly turns into a horrible CGA style graphic thing. You know, cyan, pink, white and black. And because there's so much moving things around, your movement becomes painfully slow and you turn into a cyan white Bruce. But I suppose the green Yamo at least looks more green now in his cyan, interlaced cyan look, and the ninja is still black. Otherwise, it's pretty much like it should be, just slow and painful for the eyes. The third section, however, is just pure hell. I mean, it literally is pure hell. It's just different shades of fire and brimstone for your eyes to feast upon, and not really knowing what's going on, because the shades are so close to each other that you really have to focus on looking at the movement on the screen. At least the main platforms are coloured black, but the moving things are interlaced pink against orange background. Again, who thought of this? It's just evil, and I couldn't bother to go any further from here, to be honest with you. However, amazingly, the PC-88 version has a nicely varied set of sounds, which I suppose makes me put this game on the average line. Only when Yamo makes his entrance on the screen, it sounds like a big burp than his trademark yap or whatever you call it. Anyway, let's have a look at the game. Okay, so this is the Fujitsu Micro 7, also known as the FM-7 version. And looking at it, it looks very similar to the PC-88 version, although with slightly less flickering, I have to say. And finally and lastly, the Sharp MZ800 version, which is basically a cheap port of the Spectrum version, which plays otherwise very much the same, but suffers from the same severe speed issues when the amount of sprites increases on the screen. The MZ800 version only features the blue, black and red graphics on a light grey background. Otherwise, it looks very similar to the Spectrum version. And the sound effects that I could notice were mainly just running sounds, random bips when collecting the hanging glowing items that you're supposed to collect, and there was also the death sounds. But with regards to fighting sounds, well, they're completely ignored here. So all in all, I have to say, it's not the best version. So there you go, now I'm going to rate these 11 games from the 80s. All things considered, even with the availability of your chosen machine in the country you happen to live in, and naturally their cost, you would have to be an idiot to choose your machine based on just one game. But if it would have to be one game to choose by, then I suppose you could do a lot worse than choose Bruce Lee. I mean, it really is a true classic of a game. So here we go, let's start off with number 11, which is the Acorn BBC Micro. Yep, for me, this is the worst version. Bruce Lee on the BBC looks pretty bad. I don't really have much else to say about the game. It's poor. Number 10 is the Sharp MZ800. And this version, well, it only features the blue, black and red graphics on the light grey background that I said. Otherwise, it looks exactly the same as the Spectrum version. However, I have to say, it is a poor version all around though. Number 9 is the PC-88. And here, the colour scheme was probably made by someone who was completely evil. It really is a very poor choice of colouring. And not to mention the really bad flickering. I mean, very bad. Number 8 is the FM-7, which looks very similar to the PC-88 version, although with slightly less flickering, I have to say. Number 7 is the Apple II conversion of Bruce Lee, which isn't that great. It isn't the worst version of Bruce Lee out there, but that's hardly a good reason to play it. Number 6 is the MSX version. Okay, things are starting to pick up now. I mean, the MSX version of Bruce Lee is not a bad conversion and still has a reasonable amount of entertainment value, even today, especially the two-player game. It's not a bad game. Number 5 is the Amstrad CPC. Certainly Amstrad users who played this back in 1986 when it first came out seem to have a lot of love for it, which is to be expected because Bruce Lee is a fun 1 to 2 player game and it does have memorable moments. It's a pretty good game, it's not bad. Alright, number 4 is the MS-DOS version. Now I have to say this version is quite close to the Commodore 64 in regards to playability. Okay, sure, this version does have the horrible 4-coloured cyan, magnetic, white and black colours. But other than the colours, the MS-DOS version is perfectly fine and gets close to the Atari and Commodore 64 versions in every other aspect. It's got good sound too. Again, very close to the Commodore 64 version. It's a good game. Right at number 3, I've got the ZX Spectrum version. And as I said, Bruce Lee is one of the best action-packed animated games on the ZX Spectrum. The graphics are detailed enough for the specky. Sure, that green YAML should be green, but this version plays pretty much as fast as the Commodore 64 version. And I certainly love the way that Bruce punches and kicks and ducks, and it's just terrific fun when you're knocking the shite out of your opponent. Okay, I do admit that I have a bit of nostalgia for this game, which I played for hours. That's maybe perhaps why I've got it at number 3, because it's got a massive nostalgia factor for me. Number 2, and that goes to the Atari 8-bit version. And this is the original game, it's very hard to beat. It's great fun, and I have to say, it's only to be beaten by one game. And that one game goes to the Commodore 64. Now, I certainly remember trying this game out on 4 different machines way back in the 80s when I was a kid. I played the Atari, the Spectrum, the Commodore 64 and the Amstrad CPC. And even back then, the Commodore 64 version felt clearly the best, just because of the sounds and the colour and the graphics. Now, it is very similar to the Atari in the audio, visual and gameplay, but the Commodore 64 version plays a lot faster than the Atari one, and I have to say, that is fine by me. I mean, for me, this game is just in perfect balance. And not to mention the SID chip, which does exactly what it's expected to do. It's got a great soundtrack, it's got fun sound effects, and that's why this is my number 1 choice. So, there you go. Now, of course, it's still a matter of anyone's opinion and preference. Playing style, nostalgia factor, and everything. Perhaps you disagree with my thoughts, and I have to say that is perfectly fine. But I would like to know, what was your favourite version of the game? Please let me know, leave a comment. So there you go, my favourite versions of Bruce Lee are the Commodore 64, the Atari and the Spectrum. And that's the way I see it. Now, before I go, there were other Bruce Lee games worthy of a mention. I mean, Bruce Lee certainly left its legacy. I mean, firstly, the original game was unofficially ported to the Game Boy Advance in 2003, so let's have a look at that game. Then there was a remake of Bruce Lee called Ultimate Bruce Lee, which was released for the Microsoft Windows in 2005. And this version includes better graphics and new game modes. And with regards to these modes, most of them simply give the game different graphics. At the beginning you have access to the Remake 2008 mode, the original mode, which allows you to play with the classic pixelated graphics. And then there's the Brucetron, which leads the game to a virtual reality feeling. And you can unlock more game modes if you complete certain challenges, such as defeating a certain number of enemies or completing one of the modes. So let's have a look at this game. Then, in 2015, the original game was unofficially ported over to the Master System, so let's have a look at that game too. Another nice surprise was delivered to all Bruce Lee fans in 2013 when Bruno R. Marcus released a spiritual successor to the Bruce Lee game on his website. The game was simply called Bruce Lee 2. And the game features a much larger area to play in, more enemies to deal with and more puzzling puzzles. It also has nicely authentic graphic modes for the Commodore 64 and Amstrad fans, which gave the game a retro look, like it was created for those two platforms in the first place. That's a nice touch. And it also featured sample sound from the 1984 game also, in addition to some new ones. And to us regular folks, the game felt large and complex enough not to be really possible to do on a real Commodore 64 or Amstrad. But lo and behold, conversion work for the Commodore 64 was started in mid-2014 by Jonas Hulten, and it was finished in 2015. And this is now available through the game's dedicated website in various different formats, and I cannot recommend you enough to pick it up and give it a go. It's a good game. And finally, in 2016, there was Bruce Lee RX. And this game's a graphical update to the Spectrum version of the classic game, and it was developed by Alan Turvey, and it was released, as I said, in 2016. Now, I have to say, the original was always one of my favourites in terms of playability, but for some people, it was felt that the graphics did not do the game or the legend any kind of justice. So hopefully this modest update goes some way to change that. Anyway, let's have a look at the game. So, there you go. That was my video covering the classic and fun game Bruce Lee. Now, I have to say, I've always felt that this game is one of the most stylish and important pieces of gaming history, while lots of elements rarely seen in games of that age. Sure, the game is easy enough to complete quickly when you have nothing else to do, but it's still memorising to go through the maps 40 plus years on. Christ, I'm getting old. Now, there's one thing a modern gamer should always remember when looking at this game. Back in 1984, there was not too many games that had been made that dealt with martial arts. I mean, back in 1984, not too many platform games included weapons, and if there were some, they were usually bouncing firebolts or something like that. This was most likely the first platform and adventure game that offered something resembling martial arts as a means to deal with your enemies. I mean, blimey, it didn't really matter if it didn't look exactly realistic. It was a turn in that direction. Okay, so that's a wrap, folks. I hope you really enjoyed my video. Thank you so much for watching. It really is much appreciated. Now, please remember to like my video, share a comment, and better still, subscribe to my channel. That would be very, very nice. Until my next video, I'll see you all very soon. Bye bye.
Everybody was kung fu fighting. Those kids were fast as lightning. In fact, it was a little bit frightening, but they fought with expert time.